Hello, welcome to this first in what will be a long series of videos. I'm Lex Starwalker, and I am going to be starting a new Dungeons and Dragons campaign next week. I am going to be running this in my own homebrew setting called Primordia, and we're going to do a lot more with this campaign than we've done with the previous ones. So if you've been on my channel before, then you know there's quite a bit of RPG actual play on here, and a lot of it is me running pre-published adventures. So this is going to be different because this is going to be a campaign of my own creation in a setting of my own creation. And I am hoping, in addition to provide you with entertainment in the form of actual play of our D&D sessions, I'm hoping that this will also be helpful to newer GMs, or really any GM who's looking to improve their craft. So I produce a podcast, Game Master's Journey, and which I can show you. Boom, there's the art for Game Master's Journey. I produce the Game Master's Journey podcast, which is an RPG podcast mainly from the GM's perspective, and we talk a lot about being a GM and ways that you can improve your GMing. And it's occurred to me that although I hope these conversations are helpful, they are very theoretical in nature, which is to say we're just like armchair quarterbacking, being a GM. And I thought that what would probably be much more useful for people looking for new ideas or techniques, or just to see how another GM does things, is to actually watch me run a game and to be able to interact with me about what's going on in the game. So that's what I'm going to do with this actual play. So our first session is going to be next Tuesday, October 10th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. And, you know, we're going to play hopefully every week and have an adventure. And those videos will be live streamed here on the YouTube channel and will be available later. But in addition to that, I'm also going to produce commentary videos where I talk about the campaign from a behind the screen perspective. So I may make videos before I run a certain session and talk about how I planned and prepared for that session, how I'm planning to approach it and how I'm planning to run it, what I think may happen, and things like that. And then I may also produce videos after a given session where I talk about how I think the session went, some of the things that happened, how things went differently than what I anticipated. Sorry about that. I had a little glare. I don't know how much that helped. And things like that. So kind of pre-game and post-game discussion of the actual game sessions. Now, part of the nature of the beast here is I don't want to spoil the story of the campaign for my players who may watch these videos, or for any of you who are watching the campaign more from just an entertainment perspective and don't want to see, you know, all this behind the scenes stuff that's going to spoil what's coming up in the story. So although I'm going to be producing those commentary videos from the very beginning, and you could almost think of this video itself as the first of those, I'm going to actually not release them until we're far enough ahead in the actual campaign that watching that given video isn't going to spoil what's happening in the campaign. So that means that in a given week, the commentary video that comes out may be discussing the session from the previous week, or maybe discussing a session from even farther back than that. So to help us all keep straight what's going on, every actual game session will have a number: session 1, session 2, session 3, etc., as well as a title. And when I post a commentary video, or when I produce one, I will be sure to tell you which session number and title we're talking about in that video, because they are going to be time shifted so that you know what's going on. In addition to those commentary videos, I recorded the preludes with the players. So instead of doing what people will often call session 0, where everybody gets together and makes characters and talks about the campaign and all that stuff, we handled a lot of that through our forum that we have for the campaign and over email and stuff like that. But I did get together with each player for about an hour to talk about their character concept, to go over their backstory, to explain how I'm fitting their character into the beginning of the adventure, and that kind of stuff. So a lot of the stuff that you would talk about in session 0, I handled in these one-on-one preludes with the players. So I'm in the process right now of editing those videos. Those will be in this this playlist as well. And probably won't be able to get them all out before the first session next Tuesday, but eventually all those will be out. So if you're enjoying the campaign and you want to know a little bit more about each of the characters, you can watch those prelude videos, and hopefully they'll also be helpful to new GMs as far as to see kind of what that process was like, the kind of things I talked about with the players, and how together in this collaborative process, we created this character. I mean, the player created the character with guidance from me, but together we fit them into the story, fit them into the setting, and all that good stuff. So, me personally, I'm a big fan of Critical Role, and I would have loved to seen the character creation process for those characters and the discussions between Matthew Mercer and the various players about their characters. Not that I think for a minute that this will be as popular or successful or awesome as Critical Role, but unlike Critical Role, I'm streaming this from the very beginning of the campaign, so this is something I can do. So hopefully it's helpful to you, or at the very least, hopefully it's entertaining. And hello, Kale, Venice, and Christopher in the chat. Thanks for joining us today. So this is very kind of spur of the moment, this live stream. I knew I wanted to produce this video, but turned out today I had the time to do it, and thought, hey, why not just live stream it? So what I'm doing today is telling you a little bit about the campaign, which I've basically done, and telling you kind of just an introduction to my world of Primordia. So for those of you that are interested in the setting, you can watch this and know a little bit more of what's going on, and know kind of, I think, what the players are going to know about what's going on. Although I might go into some things in here that the players may not know if they haven't read all of the extensive material I provided them with. They have something like a 58-page player's guide that I came up with. So yeah, and I discuss the building of my world of Primordia extensively in my podcast, Game Master's Journey, which you can see the art there, and I'll get rid of that now. We don't need to look at that all day. So if you're interested in learning more about the setting and even seeing a lot of the design process, you can check out Game Master's Journey at starwalkerstudios.com, and check out all the world building episodes. I did a whole bunch of world building episodes, starting at really square one and this was even before it was Primordia. I had some different ideas in the very beginning, which is like 2 or 3 years ago now. So you can learn a lot more through that. But because with the world building episodes, I was taking the listener along on the design process, there's been a lot of things that have been revised, some things numerous times, things have been added, taken away, changed. So I thought it would be helpful, even for people who listen to the podcast, to produce this to kind of give you this is kind of an introduction to the setting as it stands right now. And for those of you who've created your own worlds, whether for an RPG or for something else, world building is never really finished. It's a continuous process. So I think the foundation now is pretty solid, and a lot of this stuff I talk about today is pretty solid and probably not going to change. But through time, I'll be adding more. So let me get to my notes here, or this will take all day if I don't follow my notes. All right. So yes, for more information on Primordia, check out my podcast, Game Master's Journey. And if you check out the show notes for any of the world building episodes, I have the previous world building episodes linked so you can follow along. Welcome, Jim. Glad you could make it today too. And I apologize to everyone watching this later. I apologize that I did this so off the cuff and couldn't really give any warning to people that this was happening. So I apologize, but I've been crazy busy this week with stuff with the podcast, stuff with the YouTube channel, stuff with both my jobs, one of which is picking up now. And my wife and I both have birthdays this week. So it's just been a crazy week, and I didn't know if or when I would be able to do this week. So it was just very much kind of, I didn't know an hour ago myself that I was going to be doing this today. So I banged out my outline here, and we're going to go. So I'm going to start out reading to you a bit from my player's guide that I made for the players, but I promise I'm not going to read to you this whole thing. But I wrote this out for the players, so I thought this would be a good place to start, an introduction to my D&D setting, Primordia, that this campaign starting next week is going to take place in. And I am not, before I get into this, I'm not going to give you an exhaustive history of the world or anything like that. I'm focusing on things that are directly relevant to the story we're going to be telling in this campaign, kind of setting the stage for you for the story we're telling. I'm not going to go into a bunch of stuff that's not relevant. So the reason I'm live streaming this is in the hopes that some of you at least will be able to watch this live. And if you're in the audience watching this live, feel free to use the chat here on YouTube to ask me any questions or point out anything I've overlooked or anything like that. So if there's something I don't cover that you want to hear about, post it in the chat, and I'll probably get to that at some point, maybe at the end. So, introduction to Primordia. It has been 5 years since the time of the rifts and the beginning of the breaking of the world. Primordia is an ancient world steeped in magic, so old most of its past is a mystery. Primordia has 2 suns in the sky, one red and one blue, and both are significantly larger than the sun in our sky here on Earth, although the red sun is the larger of the two. Primordia's night sky is also very different from ours, filled with far more stars, as well as nebulas, the greater galaxy itself, and aurora, what we here in the U.S. call the Northern Lights, is a very common phenomenon that's seen in Primordia's sky all over the world almost every night. And indeed, the aurora itself or themselves are seen as manifestations of magic by most people. So because of all this, and kind of the idea here from kind of an astronomy point of view is that the world of Primordia is much closer to the center of its galaxy than Earth is. So that's why there's so many more stars in the sky. There's more nebulas and all that stuff. And because of all that, the night sky of Primordia is much brighter than on Earth, to the point that for most Primordians, their really only real experience with true darkness would be indoors or in a cave or something like that. When you're out at night, even on a new moon, it's much more brightly lit than what we're used to. So I would think that a new moon on Primordia would probably be the brightness of a full moon here on Earth, and then a full moon would be even brighter, just because of all the lights in the sky. 5 years ago, an event with a capital E happened that began the time of the rifts and the breaking of the world. No one knows for sure what happened to begin this cataclysm. Some believe it was divine judgment sent from the gods. Others believe it was caused by people meddling with ancient magics they didn't understand. Whatever the cause was, the barriers separating Primordia from the other worlds and the other planes of the multiverse began to weaken and fail. Interplanar rifts opened regularly throughout the world, and countless horrors untold invaded the world through the rifts. Some of the rifts opened for a short time and then collapsed, what we call unstable rifts, while others remained open, requiring the use of powerful magic to seal them, what we call stable rifts. At the same time that the rifts began opening, the breaking of the world began. In a span of mere hours, the great continent of Primordia itself split in half, roughly down its middle, and the two halves tore away from one another. Volcanoes erupted along the world tear, spewing lava and wiping out civilizations, while a new raging ocean formed in the void left between the separating halves. This sea, called the Sea of Storms, is a place of nightmare. Constant hurricanes and water spouts abound. Massive earthquakes ravaged the lands, leveling cities. 3 days later, the world broke again, the two new continents themselves splitting. As the breaking continued, the land masses seemingly crumbling apart, many began to see these heavings of the world and the explosions of volcanoes as the death throes of Primordia. All stared into their imminent doom. Most civilizations, cities, towns, villages, and settlements were destroyed, either swallowed by the ocean, buried in earthquakes, or incinerated by flowing lava. Others fell to rampaging monsters coming from the various rifts. A few cities, however, held on, those that were protected by ancient magical force fields or bubbles, powerful magic from millennia ago, created with the old magic that is no longer known or understood. These magical bubbles prevented the rifts from opening within their protected cities. The survivors retreated to these last few holdfasts. So just as a quick aside here, breaking the world is a cliche in fantasy. And I think one of the reasons it's the cliche in fantasy is, like so many things in fantasy and in real world mythology, it's based on something that really happened in Earth's history. And in fact, has happened more than once. So my breaking of the world is very much inspired by the breaking apart of the supercontinent Pangaea, which was the most recent supercontinent. And when Pangaea broke apart and the various pieces spread apart, it led to the continents that we have today on Earth. Now, when Pangaea broke apart, it took something like tens of thousands of years to happen. So my breaking of the world is my attempt to answer the question, what would it be like if that happened instead of over a span of 10,000 years, over a span of days or weeks or months or years? So that's kind of where that came from. So I'm just anticipating people accusing me of not being super original with this breaking of the world. And it's true, I'm not, but I just want it to be known that I'm not stealing from other fantasy IPs that have broke the world. I'm stealing from Earth history. So still stealing totally, but I feel a little more justified stealing from real history than something someone else created. Jim says cliches keep the story grounded in familiar territory, tropes all around. I agree. I often say, if you removed cliche from D&D, there'd be nothing less, or nothing left. Christopher, I'm sorry, I lost the context for your comment about Phil from accounting, but I think it's safe to blame Phil from accounting for pretty much everything. So we've got rifts opening everywhere. We've got demons and horrors from beyond the universe and elementals and everything else pouring through these rifts into the world, wreaking havoc. We've got the continents of the world breaking apart, volcanoes, tornadoes, earthquakes, hurricanes everywhere. All kinds of great stuff going on. And again, this was just 5 years ago that all this started to happen. So when all seemed lost and people really thought the world was ending, the gods stepped in. Theories abound on what it is the gods did. No one really knows. In fact, no one even knows that the gods stepped in. It's just people. That's what people believe. That's what people assume. Most people believe that the gods did something. They don't know what. Though the rifts did not stop opening completely, they greatly reduced in frequency. So today, 5 years later, there are still rifts opening, but not nearly as often as they did 5 years ago. Also, more of the rifts that open these days are unstable, which is to say, eventually they will collapse on their own, as opposed to stable, where 5 years ago, a lot of the rifts that were opening, and some of them still are open, were stable, which is to say that rift will remain open until something is done with magic to seal it. The breaking also did not end, so it's still happening, but it slowed down quite a bit, and it's almost not exponential, but it slows more as time goes on, but it's still ongoing. So the common wisdom right now is the rifts need to be stopped. They whatever the gods did slowed them down, but they need to be stopped. The breaking of the world needs to be stopped. Whatever the gods did slowed it down, but it needs to be stopped, because if the breaking continues, eventually, it could take thousands of years, but eventually there'll be nothing left but ocean as each landmass continually breaks into smaller pieces. So the Honorable Guild of Adventurers, Explorers, and Scholars used what they'd learned studying artifacts of the old magic to create portals connecting their city of Olondria with her trading partners, a few of the other cities that survived, as the land and seas were far too dangerous to travel. The magical bubble around Olondria and these portals have allowed the city to survive, although just barely. And Olondria is the heart of the campaign setting as it exists now, and this campaign we're starting next week will begin in the city of Olondria and in the nearby region. The city is filled to bursting with refugees. Although caverns beneath the city have been turned into farms lit by magical light to grow food, there is not enough food to feed so many mouths. Although elven techniques of magical construction are being used to build towers, the height of which hasn't been seen since ancient times, there's not enough space to house so many people. 5 years since the event, the situation is dire in Olondria. Starvation, disease, and crime plague the city. The queen, the noble houses, the merchant houses, and the adventurers guilds have been trying to find a way to address this problem of overpopulation. It's because of this that when rumor of a surviving village reaches the guild, they can't ignore it. The idea, what everybody thinks is true, what everybody believes, is there's this handful of the ancient cities that have these protective bubbles made of the old magic that have survived. And other than that, that's pretty much it. Definitely anything smaller than a city that doesn't have strong fortifications, there's no way it could have survived. So, there are no villages, there are no towns. So this is why this rumor of this village out there somewhere is discounted by most people. Most people are like, that's impossible. There's no way. But even so, at least some people in the guild feel that this possibility can't be ignored. Because if there is a village out there somewhere, then perhaps, however this village has managed to survive, presumably it doesn't have one of these magical bubbles around it, because they weren't built around villages, they were built around cities. So such a village must have some other way that it survived. And if the people of Olondria can figure out what that is, then maybe they could apply that so that they could start to create more settlements to move people to help with the overpopulation. So that's basically the intro from the player's guide. So now let me go through some things in addition to that basic kind of introduction. So some basic kind of high-level concepts about the setting, kind of what I think makes Primordia unique, and some of the ideas that I kind of go from. DM Dave says, Wheel of Time. I am a huge fan of the Wheel of Time, and it's actually because of the Wheel of Time. It's because of the Wheel of Time, and because I saw a documentary about Pangea that led me to decide to add the Breaking of the World. Because actually, the Time of the Rifts has been a thing since the very inception of Primordia years ago. But the Breaking of the World is something actually that I just added maybe a couple months ago. It's a fairly new addition. And it's because I just finished rereading The Wheel of Time again. And I thought, so many great fantasy series have some kind of Breaking of the World. Maybe I should do that too. And then I saw this really cool documentary on Pangea and the other supercontinents, and about the massive depopulations that came about because of the continents moving apart, and just all the impacts of it, and just had this idea of, wow, in reality, this took tens of thousands of years to happen, but what if it happened practically overnight? I mean, how insane would that be? And so I decided to run with it. So one of these kind of foundational ideas of the setting is, like I said, the night sky is very different. There are nebulas, aurora, galaxies, and all this stuff, much more than what we see in our night sky. So the night sky is much brighter. There are two suns instead of one. They're both giants. One is blue, one is red. Both significantly larger than our sun. Also, the world is extremely old. I mean, nobody knows how old it is. Even the most ancient civilizations that anything is known about are not that old compared to some of the civilizations that existed. And it's just been going on who knows how long. The world is also very large, much larger than Earth. It's what we would call a super Earth. And part of this is, I mean, I guess I can talk a little bit about why I made it this way. Part of this is I'm really into science fiction. I'm really into astrophysics. I will eat up any kind of documentary on anything related to stars, planets, galaxies, physics, quantum physics, particle physics, like any of that kind of stuff. Like, I'm super into. And a lot of times, I watch these things or I'll read articles about new Earth-like planets that are found. And I find myself wondering, what would it be like to be on a planet like that? What would it be like to be on a planet much closer to the center of the galaxy, where there's so much more going on in the night sky than what we have here? And so this was my opportunity to explore some of that, and hopefully to create a setting that at the same time is very different and exotic compared to Earth, to where if you were to see this in a movie, I mean, one shot of the night sky and you would instantly know that you are not on Earth. You're in a very different place. And so would be very inspiring in that way. Like, there'd be lots of inspiration for new and interesting tales. But also is similar enough to Earth that we can be grounded and feel like we somewhat understand it. And so the same kind of thing with the world being so large is I've read about super Earths and wondered, what would it be like You think about how long it took in human history before, the great civilizations from the different continents, especially from like North and South America and Europe and Asia and Africa, how long it took them all to discover one another and to come into contact, and imagine how much more so that would be if the world were even bigger. So, I kind of want to explore that. And the other cool thing about the world being so big is that I'll never run out of design space. Right now I'm really focused on Olondria and the surrounding region. In the future, if I wanted to do a campaign that was very different, I could go to another continent. I could go to the other side of the world. And no matter how many times I do that, there will always be more parts of the world that I have not explored that are blank canvases that I can do whatever I want with. And with the world being so old, I can also do the same thing through time. So I could go to previous ages of Primordia or future ages of Primordia if I wanted to do something very different. I mean, I could see doing a science fantasy game like Numenera, either far in or in Primordia's past or far in Primordia's future. Either would work. So, one of my ideas behind some of these core concepts of the setting is to leave as much freedom for me as I can in the future. So if I want to do something very different with my D&D game, I don't need to come up with a whole new setting to do it. I can go to another continent, I can go to another time period and do it in Primordia and have everything I'm doing building up this one setting instead of spreading myself all over the place. There are only 18 gods in Primordia. Actually started out, there were fewer than that. There were like 8 or 9 in the beginning. I've now expanded it to 18. And something that is unique about Primordia compared to some other D&D settings out there is that there are only 18 gods. It doesn't matter. You go on the other side of the planet, they're worshiping the same gods. Now, different cultures may have very different ideas about what each god represents, what they're like, what they expect from them, all that stuff. Their religions may be very different, may be completely different, but they're all worshiping the same gods. Long ago, and I kind of already mentioned it, but long ago, millennia ago, there was an ancient old magic, capital O, capital M magic. And this ancient magic could do things that can't be done today. People were able to perform basically miracles with the old magic, and that knowledge has been lost. And basically, the old magic goes far beyond what we see in, for instance, the player's handbook as far as spells and magic items in the DMG. So, beyond 9th level spells, artifacts were likely created using the old magic, things like that. Also created with the old magic were portals that have since been studied by the guild, and they've learned to duplicate them, and that's what connects the cities together today. And also these magical bubbles, which are very much based on the idea of mythals from Forgotten Realms. Yeah. Halfway through that, I thought I was saying the wrong thing, but yeah, that's right. So the idea is like a magical force field around the city, and the various cities that have these magical bubbles, each bubble is different as far as its properties, but one thing that they all share in common is they prevent any kind of magical travel from inside, how to say this, across the boundary of the bubble. Okay, so if you're inside of one of these bubbles, you can't teleport outside of it. You can't plane shift to another plane. You'd have to go outside the bubble. And in the same way, if you're outside one of these bubbles, you can't teleport inside or plane shift inside or anything like that. So that is why the cities that were protected by these bubbles were places of refuge during the time of the rifts, because the rifts would not open inside the bubbles. So they were the only places that was safe. If you were in a city that wasn't protected by one of these bubbles, you could have a rift to the plane of fire, or the abyss, or the nine hells open right in the town square, and demons are pouring out, or lava is pouring out, or whatever, depending on where the rift goes. And walls won't protect you from things like that. Only these magical bubbles were protections against the rifts, and some of them, or maybe all of them, also provided some protection from the extreme weather and climate changes and natural disasters and things that were going on all over the place. Let me check the chat here real quick. DM Dave says borrowing fantasy tropes is fun. The players can get a kick out of it. Yeah, and again, I feel like the more crazy you go with your setting or your story or whatever, the more kind of outside the box you go with things, the more you need those tropes and cliches to kind of ground everybody. Like if I made Primordia, if I made everything completely different than anything you've ever seen before, it would be a confusing mess. Like it'd be too much to wrap your head around. So you need some touchstones to anchor you, so that there are some things that you can feel like you understand, and you can make certain assumptions. So one of those cornerstones is usually human nature, right? Even in the most far out fantasy or sci-fi fiction, humans are still humans. They still act like humans. So that's something we can ground ourselves in, that we can protect. We can predict human nature, right? We can predict how someone's going to react to something. And as you do more fantastic things with your story, the more important those things become. Let's see. Jim says, I've been listening to this show for years and only learned how to spell mythal like last month. Yeah, so mythal is a thing. If you're not in the Forgotten Realms, you may never hear about it. So it's basically the word myth with an AL on the end. So I'm calling them bubbles in Primordia, and probably someday I'll come up with a better term than that. Just because I feel like mythal is a little loaded, just because it is specific to Forgotten Realms and could lead to assumptions that would not be true about my magic bubbles, which are very similar to mythals in some way, but different in others. So there was this old magic long ago that no one really understands anymore. And just much magical knowledge and just much knowledge in general has been lost. I mean, no one has any concept of how much has really been lost through the eons of civilizations on Primordia. Also, another kind of foundational element of the world is that it has seen a lot of travelers from other worlds and planes throughout its history. And part of this is because Primordia is so old, and part of it is because the magic of Primordia, the magical energy field that kind of suffuses the planet, is so strong that a lot of times powerful spellcasters will come to Primordia from other worlds or other planes to do powerful magics, because it's possible for them to do magics on Primordia that maybe they can't do on the world that they come from, because the magic is more present in Primordia. Hexalus wants me to bring back my beard. You know what? November's coming. Isn't November like grow your beard month or something? So the beard may come back. Yeah. Okay. So that's the basic stuff. So really, as far as history of the world, beyond 5 years ago doesn't really matter. So I'm not going to bore you with 30,000 years of history, because it doesn't really matter. But we do need to know what happened 5 years ago and what's been happening in the last 5 years. So there was the event, capital E. And that's just a term people use. Like, we're assuming there was an event. Maybe there wasn't. Who knows? Nobody knows. But people just assume that something happened, right? Like, you had the state of the world, and then it changes dramatically. People think or theorize that there must have been some impetus, right? Something happened that caused this change or set these events into motion. But what that was, what happened 5 years ago that started all this happening, nobody knows. So the time of the rifts began 5 years ago, and the actual what people refer to as the time of the rifts lasted between 2 to 3 years, depending on what part of the world you were in. So during this time, there were just rifts opening to other planes and worlds all over the place. Many of them were stable, which is to say they stay open until someone uses powerful magic to close them. Others were unstable and might stay open for a few minutes, a few hours, a few days, a few weeks, a few months, whatever, and then collapse on their own. Also, 5 years ago, due to the event that we theorize existed, the breaking of the world began. And this was simply the breaking of the large continents of Primordia into smaller continents. And just to avoid confusion, right now I use the word Primordia to describe the world as a whole, and also to describe the continent that Olondria was on, that during the breaking has since split into 2 and then 4 pieces. And if scholars and sages have come up with names for the new continents, I haven't decided what those are yet. All right, where was I? So the continents are breaking apart. This led to massive natural disasters like volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, all that good stuff. And the continent that Olondria is on split in 2. And this breaking is continuing, though it's slowed down. So there's now a new sea to the east of Olondria. It's quite a ways away, called the Sea of Storms, because it's filled with these huge hurricanes and water spouts that are just continuous. And this is something that maybe isn't super obvious to the people of the world yet, only 5 years later, but the breaking is also leading to, or going to lead to climate changes that eventually will be pretty significant. But, that kind of thing takes a while. So the breaking's still happening, but at a slower rate. And it's believed by sages, if the breaking isn't somehow stopped, that it will eventually lead to the entire world breaking apart and there being only ocean left, which would be bad for humanity and the other intelligent races of the world that aren't aquatic. So the breaking in the rifts led to the fall of most of the cities and smaller settlements in the world, and all the nations fell. All that's left at this point is a handful of isolated cities, more like city-states, and there are no larger nations because these cities that still exist have no control of anything beyond the bubble that protects their city. In fact, they tend not to even leave that bubble. So that's all that's left. A handful of ancient cities that were lucky enough to be protected by these bubbles of magic. And the retreat, capital R, refers to the retreat of humanity. And everything's very human-centric, because I assume, like many settings, that the majority of people in this age are humans. And Olondria is primarily a human city. And so the story is told from the human point of view. But the humans weren't the only ones that retreated. The same things happened to the elves and the dwarves and everything else. But during the retreat, humans retreated to these few cities that were left. So people that were in villages and towns or out living in the wilderness on their own that survived the various natural disasters and were able to made their way to Olondria and a handful of other cities and retreated to these holdfasts. So now let's talk a little bit more about Olondria specifically. The city of Olondria has existed for millennia. It's thousands of years old. It was originally an elven city. So millennia ago, Olondria was built by the elves and was then abandoned by the elves, or the elves were driven out, or something. There was a span of time where Olondria was abandoned, and then was later, more recently, in a matter of hundreds of years ago, was settled by humans who took up residence in the city. So there are different districts of Olondria. There is the inner city, which is the oldest part of the city. It's the part that was built by elves thousands of years ago. It's also called the Old City. It's also called the Elven District. And the inner city itself is surrounded by a wall. Now, elves of Primordia don't build the way that humans do. So elves don't quarry stone and shape them into blocks and put them together into buildings. They don't cut down trees and cut them into boards and build them into buildings. They don't build that way. Elves build using magic, and they grow their buildings. So a wood elf city, for instance, would be made of living trees. And Primordia has huge trees. There are redwoods and the equivalent of redwoods in Primordia. There are also trees that dwarf even redwoods. Huge trees. Part of this is because there's abundant sunlight from two giant suns in the sky. There's even some light in the dark, and there are species of plants in Primordia that are able to photosynthesize the amount of light that's available at night, especially when the moon is full. And so plant life is very vibrant on Primordia, and there are these just colossal trees. So wood elves could take one of these humongous trees and use magic to shape it into buildings, and the trees are still alive and still growing. High elves, on the other hand, tend to build their buildings from stone, sometimes even crystal if it's available, and this is done by magically pulling the stone out of the ground and magically shaping it into the shapes that you want. This means that elven buildings tend to be much stronger than human buildings because they're of a single piece. So a stone tower that a high elf created is one solid piece of stone. It's not individual blocks that are put together. So the inner city of Olondria is all these buildings that were created magically. Around the inner city is what's called the outer city, also called the new city. And this part of the city is of human construction. So hundreds of years ago, when the humans settled Olondria, which was abandoned at that time, of course they utilized the elven architecture, and that's all that there was at the time. But as the humans reproduced and they grew, they soon expanded beyond that and started building their own structures outside what was then the outer wall of the city. There's now a wall around the outer city that is of human construction. And again, the inner city wall is of elven construction, so is magically grown stone and is pretty formidable. And then, let's see. So Olondria is a relatively small city, certainly compared with some of the metropolises that you see in Otherworld. Cities like Waterdeep or the Free City of Greyhawk. Olondria is nowhere near that big. It is not a metropolis. It's a smaller city. Nevertheless, even though it's not huge like Waterdeep, it is a melting pot of peoples from all over the known world of Primordia. For centuries, Olondria has stood as a symbol of cooperation between and among the various, quote, civilized races of Primordia. So before the breaking, Olondria traded far and wide with peoples all over the known world. Since the breaking, trade is limited to those cities that Olondria has portals to, but there's still trade with elves and dwarves, and there are still a wide variety of peoples who live in Olondria, if only because that's where they happened to be when all this shit went down 5 years ago. So Olondria has endured much change and social upheaval in the past 5 years. The retreat led to a massive influx of refugees into the city, human and non-human. And the city is now filled to bursting with all these new people. And it struggles to find food and space and housing for everyone. Now, some of the things that have been done in the last 5 years is Olondria had some natural cave systems beneath it. And so those have been expanded, and they are magically lit, and there are fields, underground fields in these caves now. So if you picture the bubble, the magical bubble around Olondria as an actual bubble, it's a sphere. So as far as it extends out in all directions from the center of the city, it also extends up and it also extends down. So they have expanded the cavern system underneath the city as much as they can while still remaining within the protection of that bubble. So there are fields down there, and a lot of the homeless are down there as well in these subterranean places because, weather is not an issue down there. The temperature is fairly constant year round, and you don't have rain and things to deal with. So if you're homeless and you have no shelter, it's a better place to be than on the streets on the surface. However, on the other hand, for the most part, the only people down in the subterranean levels are farmers and people directly involved with farming and homeless. So it's not a great place to beg and things like that. So some people, travel back and forth every day, or some people live on the surface because it's easier to get handouts there. So it varies. So Olondria has, ever since it was settled by humans, has had basically three social classes: the peasant class, the merchant class, and the nobility. But since the retreat, things have gotten more complicated. Most of the noble houses of Olondria have lost their estates. So Olondria was part of a feudal type system. But all of these lands that the nobles had out beyond the city are now untamed wilderness, and the nobles have retreated to the city. And in a feudal system, what is a noble without an estate, right? The system itself starts to not make so much sense anymore if you don't have lands to give the various nobles. So these landless nobles are now lacking a real power base for themselves. Even the nobles who had estates within the city itself are struggling, for these estates don't really produce anything, and they originally primarily served as vacation spots for the nobles or convenient places for them to stay when they came to the city to attend court. Since the retreat, the merchants, on the other hand, the merchant class, have grown greatly in power. Trade is now relatively safe. It's more limited. There's only a handful of cities they can trade with. But trade with those cities is much safer than it was before the retreat, because merchants no longer need to brave the wilds in caravans or ships that travel long distances between cities. Instead, traveling from one city to another is as simple as walking through a door, and these portals are within the city. So there's really no risk in trading with these other cities like there used to be. You don't have to form caravans. You don't have to hire guards. You don't have to worry about bandits and monsters attacking you on your journey and all that kind of stuff. So now trade is as easy and safe as walking through a door, passing by portal from Olondria to her half dozen or so trading partners. Because of this, the merchants have grown much in wealth since the retreat. Unlike the nobles then, who are experiencing a power base that has largely disappeared, the nobles find their power base growing more extensive. So this has created a lot of instability and conflict. the merchants are calling for reform in the government, arguing that the feudal model, the feudal system that they used, no longer works in the current climate, the current age. The noble houses struggle to hold on to their power and influence. Nobody gives up power willingly, right? The queen has been struggling to push forward reform, trying to find some form of compromise of sorts between the nobles and the merchants. She wants the noble houses to cede parts of their estates to merchant houses, and she wants the merchant houses to compensate the noble houses with goods and gold. Of course, there's been resistance to this on both sides. The nobles don't like it, and the merchants don't like it. And there have been numerous assassination attempts against the queen since she's been trying to push this agenda. So that's kind of the history and kind of the political situation of Olondria right now. So let's talk now, or wait, hang on. Let me check the chat before I go on to the next thing. Welcome everybody in the chat. Thanks for tuning in. Let's see. So Christopher suggests sphere or zone instead of bubble. Yeah, that could work. I gotta think. I want something catchy. I don't know. Charles likes bubble. Let's see. Christopher says he's fond of zone, if only because players can refer to it as a low-level zone. Yeah. Well, I'll kind of have that in the hinterlands, sort of, maybe. The Misty Wood is sort of my low-level zone. It's the newbie zone, if there is such a thing. Safety bubble. Yeah, that's a good one, Charles. Hey, Emmanuel. Emmanuel's here, too. All right. So I don't see any questions. So let me wet my whistle and we'll keep going. All right. So far, this has been pretty easy stuff. Right. Pretty standard fare, I think. Nothing super original, I don't think. But now we're going to go weird. Especially for all you non-anthropologists out there. I hope your brain's stretched out. You're going to have to wrap your brain around some weird concepts here. So I have a degree in anthropology. I studied cultural anthropology, archaeology, linguistics, forensics, all four subfields of anthropology. And I wanted, in creating my own setting for D&D, I wanted to draw upon my anthropology background, because in getting my degree in anthropology, I have learned about a lot of things that I would have never known anything about otherwise. And specifically learning about cultures who are very different from ours. And by ours, I mean pretty much probably anybody watching this. Our cultures, although very different, have a lot of things in common that I think a lot of us who aren't exposed to anthropology just assume are universal, at least when it comes to human culture. And indeed, they are not. And so I've known from the very beginning that I wanted to explore different types of cultures. And I thought, well, I could, instead of basing all my cultures on European cultures and ancient Greece and ancient Rome and all this stuff we've seen a million times in fantasy, I could create some cultures that are based on various native North and South American and Mesoamerican cultures I've studied, and other less commonly known cultures throughout history and even prehistory. I still plan to do that, but as I've been working on this setting for over 2 years now, it came to me the other day that I've been focused on one city, Olondria, and for good reason, because I'm a strong believer when it comes to world building or preparing as a GM in general, to focus on what you need right now, which is why I don't have 30,000 years of history to give you. I have 5 years because that's what I needed for this. I needed enough historical context to be able to kind of show us where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. But that's all I need. I don't need 30,000 years of history. to make sense of the story I want to tell. So I've consciously focused on one city because I thought I would rather have one city that's fairly well developed that I just set all my campaigns in than have a bunch of cities, but they're all very, very shallow. There's not a lot of thought put into them because, I mean, at any given time, the players are only in one place anyway. And with Primordia being so large, traveling from one city to another is more of an undertaking than it would be in most worlds. And then you throw in the rifts and, the state of affairs, and it's even more so. So, it totally makes sense that we could play a long time and never need a city other than Olondria. So I've been focused on Olondria and thinking when I'm really happy with Olondria and I feel like I have it super well developed and fleshed out, then I'll move on to the next thing. So that being the case, I thought, if I reserve doing weird stuff with the culture, and weird in quotes, I don't want to offend anybody by calling their culture weird. By weird, I just mean different from what we in America and Europe and similar places are used to. That's all I mean by weird. I'm not making any kind of judgment on what's quote normal. But if I save all that for other places, we may never get there, or at the very least, it's going to be a long time. And I'd already played around with Olondria being maybe at least slightly matriarchal instead of patriarchal, because I knew I wanted there to be a queen, and I thought maybe there's been a history of queens. So I already kind of had that seed from the very beginning, and I decided, I'm just going to go all the way, and I'm going to do something different with Olondria itself, and we'll just see what happens. So I decided, and I decided this fairly recently, that I am going to, not only is Olondria a matriarchal society, it's also a matrilineal society, which just saying those two things, it's completely different than anything we're used to. So that's enough to make it quote weird for us. And I have always been, well, not always, since I started studying anthropology, I've always been fascinated with matrilineal societies. I personally wish I lived in a matrilineal society, and not to say that any cultural construct is perfect, but I feel like a lot of the issues that we have in our society here in the United States today, we would not have if we lived in a matrilineal society. A lot of those things that we worry about every day are just go away. So what is a matrilineal society? If you haven't, if you have no interest in anthropology, you probably have never heard that word before. So let's start with a more familiar word, matriarchal. Okay, so United States, it is a patriarchal society, which means power is held by men. And we are struggling to become more egalitarian, and we've definitely made huge steps in that direction. But we're still a patriarchal society, right? There's tons of signs of that, and I don't think it's something that a lot of people would argue that yes, we're more egalitarian than we were 50 years ago, but we're still ultimately a patriarchal society. So a matriarchal society is just kind of the opposite. So you think about, a patriarchal society and how, the men have more political power. Depending how patriarchal the society is, maybe women, aren't allowed to work, or aren't allowed to leave the house, or aren't allowed to leave the house without their husband as an escort, or whatever. Or maybe it's more egalitarian and women can work, but they don't get paid as much as the men, all that kind of stuff. So matriarchal is just kind of flipping that around and saying it's the same kind of thing, only it's the women that have the more esteemed place in society, and it's the men who are second-class citizens, so to speak. So Olondria is in, as far as the matriarchal side of it, is in a place very similar to where we are today in the U.S., which is to say, in the past, it was much more matriarchal than it is today. I mean, in Olondria, men enjoy, for the most part, equal rights as women do. They can own property. They can have custody of their children. As far as gender relations, it's fairly egalitarian. As far as you can find male and females in any profession you could think of. There's not this concept of, oh, this is men's work and this is women's work. Really in this day and age, the matriarchy is limited primarily to the fact that they tend to have queens. There have been kings in the history of Olondria, but they've been rare. And for whatever reason, when there have been kings, it hasn't gone well for the Olondrians, to the point that most Olondrians today would not want a king. They would see that as unlucky at the very least, just because historically, anecdotally, when there have been kings, it's been bad times. So they really prefer to have a queen. They feel much more comfortable about that. So what's much more interesting to talk about is the fact that it's matrilineal. So what matrilineal means is to say that the family line is traced through the women, not the men. So this is to say, when you think about who you're related to versus who you're not related to, and how, quote, closely you're related to someone, it's all about who your mother is as opposed to who your father is. So here in the United States, we're a patrilineal society. We trace lineage through the men. So you can see this because through the tradition of when a couple gets married, traditionally the woman takes the man's last name. When they have kids, the kids traditionally have the father's last name. They don't have the mother's maiden name as their last name. So those are part of a patrilineal society. So matrilineal societies are very different, and it's difficult to even talk about them and describe them because our very language is patrilineal. So it can be even more difficult to wrap your head around because our language fails to accurately describe it, because the terminology would be different. So because the family is traced through the mother, not the father, there are things that just work differently in Olondria. So for instance, if you're a citizen born in Olondria, when you think of what we in America would call your father figure, the man in your life, the adult man in your life who is your kind of model for what a man is, who teaches you life's lessons, who teaches you, how to hunt or all those things, that your, quote, father figure, what we would call a father figure in Olondria, would not actually be your biological father. It would be what we would call your uncle or your mother's brother. So because of that, a lot of Olondrians actually have multiple fathers, or what we would call father. And you see how the language is breaking down, it's failing us. Because those people in an Olondrian's life are their mother's brother or brothers, right? So that's your father figure in your life is your mother's brother, not your biological father. Your biological father would be more like an uncle in our society, almost kind of extended family, right? Like you're related to him, maybe he's a cool guy, maybe you hang out or whatever, but you don't, he's not the one you come to when you need advice or whatever. That would be your mother's brother or one of them or all of them. Because of this, one's biological father in this kind of society can be largely absent or entirely absent from your life. And that's not uncommon. Or if they're more present in your life, they'd be more like an uncle in our society. And this all just depends on your mother's relationship to the guy, right? So if they still get along well, then he's probably around and he's part of your life. If they don't, he's not. But it's not like there's a loss there, because it's like having an uncle you never see. It's not nearly as big a deal as never seeing your father, right? It's totally different. Because descent is traced through the female line, there are a lot of things that are very important in a patrilineal society like ours that are much less important or not important at all in a society like Olondria. Things like marital infidelity, the concept of cheating, the value placed on women being virgins when they're first married. These aren't a big deal in this society because one's parentage is never in doubt. So the reason that, we have such strong customs against cheating on your mate or being a virgin when you're married and things like that is before modern science, the only way a man could know for sure that a given child was his was if he knew for sure that he was the only person who had sexual access to the mother during the time before she got pregnant, right? And keep in mind, ancient peoples didn't necessarily understand completely how conception works. So we came up with these cultural ideas of, women have to be virgins when they're married. And if you cheat on your mate, that's the worst thing you could do, because we need to know when I'm slaving out in the fields all day or whatever I do, or I'm hunting and gathering, and I come home and I feed my kids, I want to know that those are actually my kids. And I'm not feeding, the neighbor's kids because the neighbor got with my wife and I didn't know about it, right? So in a patrilineal society, those kinds of things are super important before you have modern science, so that your kids are yours. But if your family is derived from your mother, none of that matters. You will always know who your mother is, unless there are some really bizarre circumstances. You will always know who your mother is, right? And who your father is doesn't matter. So in these societies, there is no real value placed on female virginity because it doesn't matter. Marital infidelity isn't as big of a deal. And divorce is also not as big of a deal and much simpler. I remember, I always like to tell the story. I remember it was one of the North American, Native American tribes. I can't remember which one. It's been so long. But I remember learning about this, and, to kind of illustrate how simple divorce can be in these cultures. There's this one culture where a man might come home from hunting or whatever at the end of the day, and he goes to go home to his wife's teepee and sees his moccasins sitting outside the teepee. And that means his wife has divorced him. And there's no drama, there's no tears, there's no fighting. He just picks up his moccasins and he goes to his sister's teepee and stays with her. Because in these societies, as a man, the most important woman in your life, other than your mother, is your sister. It's not your wife. And you are always part of your sister's household. So, you get married, you go live with your wife. But if she dumps you, you go back with your sister, and you have far more emotional attachments to your sister than your wife anyway. So it's just not as big of a deal. And again, you're not the father figure of your children's lives. So the fact that you're not around anymore also isn't a big deal. Again, it's like if you just stop seeing an uncle as much, it's not that big of a deal. So a man is always most loyal to his sister's household and considers that his true family. Families in Olondria, because of this, tend to be quite large. A family consists of a woman, her children, her sisters, and her brothers, and also her sister's children. And unmarried men live in their sister's house. So the houses are large, the families are large. And what they would consider the, quote, nuclear family would include people that we would consider more extended family, like your aunts and your uncles, but would exclude some people that we would think of as nuclear family, namely your father. So that's all, that's all of that. So as far as gender roles in the society, it's like I said, it's mostly egalitarian, at least among the humans, the dwarves, the halflings, the elves, etc. Examples of either sex can be found in any job or profession. And this applies to all genders, non-genders, things like that, and part of this is because it's matrilineal. That kind of stuff matters a lot less as well. And part of it's just that it's a fantasy world. So in a world with dragons and demons and orcs and goblins and trolls and beholders, a person's gender or sexual orientation just isn't something worth concerning yourself with, and people don't care. So this attitude of equality is also rooted in the religion. The gods and goddesses themselves are seen to be equal in power. So all 18 of the deities are fairly equal in power, or that's what's believed. And there's definitely not a thing of, the gods are more powerful than the goddesses. They're pretty much equal. So if there's no difference amongst the gods, why would there be amongst humans, right? As above, so below. So as I said, there has been a tradition of matriarchy in the past of the city, and in the past it was more matriarchal than it is now, but in recent centuries it's opened up a lot. And yeah, like I said, these days members of any sex can be found in pretty much any profession. It's pretty egalitarian as far as that goes. Elandrians are pretty open-minded when it comes to the other races in the world, and again, this is because they have such a long history of trade, and they're just used to strange peoples being in their city. Elves, dwarves, halflings, half-elves are openly accepted. Rare races like Azamar, Goliath, Furbolg, Genasi are viewed as unusual curiosities, but they're not generally feared or hated or discriminated against in any way. Tieflings and half-orcs, on the other hand, do face distrust and fear a lot of times until people get to know them. So people are a little bit intimidated by tieflings and half-orcs that they don't know, but even these characters can easily gain acceptance once people get to know them and enjoy the same kind of treatment as anyone else would have. So but before you think this is a utopia, although the Elandrians tend to be quite enlightened when it comes to gender and racial issues, they're much less enlightened when it comes to class distinctions. There are clear, rigid lines between the peasant, merchant, and noble classes. However, some social mobility is possible. For instance, a very industrious peasant could work themselves into the merchant class. And before the retreat, it wasn't unheard of for a merchant house to be granted title and lands for service to the crown. So, it was possible for a peasant to maybe work up to merchant, and it was possible for a merchant to gain or elevate into the nobility. Let me see, I lost my place. Another possible avenue for social mobility in Olondria is as an adventurer. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the guild in a minute, but in Primordia, adventurer is a bona fide profession, just like blacksmith or tailor or tanner, right? Like there are people who are adventurers. That's what they do. And anyone can become an adventurer. You just need the will, the insanity, and the ability. So a peasant, a farmer, could totally become an adventurer. Adventurers who live long enough often accumulate significant wealth and political power, lands and titles as well. So in this way, a peasant who becomes an adventurer could advance as high as the nobility itself. So adventuring is actually the best way to, or I don't know if the best way, it's a path of social advancement that's available to anyone who has the ability to undertake it. But obviously not everybody can succeed as an adventurer. The noble houses themselves have a strict and complex hierarchy, which is derived through a complicated combination of wealth, power, influence, number of generations of the family line, size of the family, amount of land owned, titles gained, and other factors. At the top of the noble hierarchy is the royal family itself. So the greater world of Primordia is a very diverse place. So, we're talking about Olondria here. So there are other places in Primordia that would seem very strange and alien to an Olondrian. So there's all kinds of variety out there. And I feel like there's something I wanted to mention, and now I've forgotten it. Yeah. All right. Oh, so some of this is still coming from my player's guide, and I have this little what in a more a better laid out and formatted document would be like a little sidebar. I have this little thing about pants. So in Primordia, in Olondria specifically, adventurers are kind of like the rock stars or the movie stars of the city. Adventurers are looked up to, they're feared, they're admired, they're known. Adventurers can become famous, just like in ancient Rome, certain gladiators that were really successful could become famous among the people. Same kind of thing with adventurers. So they're very much kind of admired, just like rock or movie stars or athletes are in our culture today. So obviously, as an adventurer, you can't really be very successful as an adventurer wearing a dress, right? It's just not conducive to running and climbing and crawling through tunnels and avoiding traps and fighting dragons and all that stuff. So women adventurers wear pants. I mean, obviously, right? So kind of the trickle down of this is that the peasants and the higher ranking noble women, they wear dresses because it's the traditional what women wear. But among the middle class, especially the merchants and the artisans, it's become quite fashionable, quite the rage for women to wear pants, because that's what the adventurers do, right? Just like in our society, people will copy movie stars or pop music stars as far as how they dress. The same kind of thing in Olondria. So at least among the middle class, we're seeing a lot more women wear pants lately, all kinds of pants, in an imitation of their adventure heroes. And it's even begun trickling into the nobility a bit, although at least right now it's more rare there. A lot of the nobles resist it because tradition is very important to the noble houses because it's where their power comes from. And also they don't want to be seen as imitating the merchants. And a lot of times they don't want to be seen to be imitating adventurers either, because let's face it, there's probably a lot more adventurers that come from the peasant class than honestly any other class, and more from the merchant class than the noble class, right? Like, you'd have to be really driven to be an adventurer to leave the relatively comfort of the noble life to go mucking about in the wilds, right? So, where on the other hand, as a peasant, there's a lot more seeming to be gained by becoming an adventurer, and the hardships encountered or experienced as an adventurer seem less bad when you're used to living as a peasant than they do if you're a well-to-do merchant or a noble. So it may come to pass that eventually the peasants will start wearing pants too, although they tend to be less educated and more kind of backwards and traditional. So it might take longer to catch on with the peasants, but it's among the peasants, it really matters on the what a given person does, right? If you're a woman who's a farmer, then you probably wear pants, right? Again, it's hard to farm in a dress too. If you're a woman who's a weaver, maybe you more, wear a dress. I don't know. It's much more kind of individual thing, but that's kind of an interesting thing that's changing in the culture right now. So it's always fun to highlight things that are changing. All right, let's see what's going on in the chat real quick. Let's see. Yeah, so Kale Venice asked about what happens if there's no brothers. That would probably be fairly rare because people tend to have big families. But remember that the mother's sisters are also part of the household. But I guess in the unlikely circumstance that a given family there were no brothers at all, then the father might take on more of a role, but he wouldn't have to. But it's like in our society, there are families that don't have a quote father figure, right? So it's the same kind of thing. Let's see. Kale Venice says, serious question. What about men with no sisters? Are they doomed to wander, or is there a community house? Well, a man with no sisters would live in his mother's house. So yeah. Let's see. All right. Allie said that's a genius solution of the problem, and I'm reading this much later, so I'm not sure what was a genius solution to which problem. So maybe you can tell me, Allie, because I missed that. All right. So now the last thing I think I'll talk about, and then we'll see if people have any questions, is the guild itself. So as I said, the adventurer is an actual profession in the world. So there is a guild for that, just like there's guild for a lot of things in this kind of setting. So the full name of the guild is the Honorable Guild of Adventurers, Explorers, and Scholars. And they are a pretty eclectic bunch. Oh, wait, hang on. Allie says the adoption idea. Oh, I think she's talking about what Kale Venice said. He said... he was asking about men with no sisters, if they could be adopted as uncles by families in need. Yeah, that could be. But again, they would just be part of their mother's household. So, the only way you would have no household is if all the women in your lineage were killed somehow or died somehow. But yeah, so the guild was created about 100 years ago by a group of powerful individuals, many or maybe even all of them themselves adventurers. And their goal is to explore the world, to rediscover the lost magics, and discover new magics, preserve history, and protect the city of Olondria. And something I should tell you is Olondria is named after one of the goddesses in the world, the goddess Olondra, who is the goddess of knowledge, history, and civilization, and things like that. So the guild is also very much tied to Olondra and her ideals, which is why they preserve history. So, they do archaeology, and they adventurers who explore ancient ruins are not only looking for any kind of magic that might be left that could be studied and learned from, but also just things of historical and cultural significance like art, religion, artifacts, and by artifacts I mean in the archaeological sense, like tools and other signs of culture, and basically things that you'd want to put in a museum so that knowledge of the past can be preserved, because again, so much has been lost, and part of the guild's goal is to preserve the past before it's all lost. During the time of the rifts and the beginning of the breaking of the world, the guild discovered some of the secrets of these ancient portals that existed in some of the ancient cities, enough that they learned how to build new portals. These portals use the old magic, and they're able to connect the cities protected by the magic bubbles. So I told you that one of the things that all the bubbles do is they prevent any kind of magical travel across their border. Well, these portals are an exception, but the portals are special in that two portals connect together. So each portal goes to one other portal. They don't have multiple destinations, and there has to be a portal on each side, right? So a portal can't open into just anywhere. It opens at another portal. Think of it almost like two portals are really one portal that are entangled. It's like there's only really one portal. It's in two different places, and you can travel through it from one place to the other. So as far as Olondria has a portal to the human city of Null, which is actually quite distant, and Null is actually not protected by a bubble. Null is kind of weird. It's in a dead magic area. So its protection from the rifts was the fact that there's no magic there, so the rifts couldn't open there. Olondria also has a portal to the high elf city of Faelil and a few other cities that Olondria trades with. One of them is a dwarven hold. Since the retreat, these portals are the only way, for the most part, that people travel from one city to another to trade. So for the most part, adventurers are the only people who go out into the wilderness. Everybody else, if they need to go to another city, they use a portal. The portals are free for citizens to use. They're open during daylight hours, and they are heavily guarded and protected. And indeed, that's one of the many functions of the Guild of Adventurers, is they see to the maintaining and protection of the portals, as well as they're the ones who build new portals. So, one of the things that's happening in the world right now is Olondria is seeking to establish trade with more cities, finding more cities that have hopefully survived, and building these portals to connect them, to extend their trade network. So that's something that the player characters could get involved with later on in the campaign if they wish to. Adventurers of the guild are recognized by their distinctive cloaks, which display their team colors and coat of arms. So the idea here is just like in sports, how different teams have different colors and different logos. The same thing with adventuring teams, and these are reflected in the cloaks that they wear. And this is a way that people know that not only that you're an adventurer, but what team you're part of. And like I said, adventurers who are successful tend to become famous and will be recognized on the streets. Adventurers are respected and feared, but thanks to the guild, they're more respected than feared these days compared to in the past. Because again, one of the things that the guild has done is kind of given adventurers a framework to be under, and having some supervision over them, to the point that it's really frowned upon to be like a freelance adventurer who isn't part of the guild. And in fact, in Olondria, it's actually illegal to be an adventurer that isn't a part of the guild. So it gives people some comfort to know that these really powerful individuals that wield magic and run about exploring have some kind of oversight and someone that they answer to. And the the guild works very closely with the queen of the city, and indeed the guild is under her authority. So the guild ultimately answers to the queen. So in this way, adventurers are seen to be regulated and under control instead of these unpredictable wild elements like they used to be. Let's see. So let me check out the the chat. People are talking about pants. Wormholes. Jose Luis mentions wormholes. So yeah, exactly. The portals, you could totally think of it as a wormhole. That's kind of the concept behind it. Yeah, totally. Ali says, isn't there an archaeologist in the Unearthed Arcana? I love the idea of it, but my players like to be murder hobos. Imagine the hooks for new adventures with an archaeological find or two. Yeah, I don't know about Unearthed Arcana, but in the adventure that just came out, Tomb of Annihilation, there are two new backgrounds. There's the anthropologist and the archaeologist, and they're both awesome. I'm huge fans of them. I added them to the campaign, and they're definitely a thing in Primordia. So they're really cool. When Wizards did Curse of Strahd, they had a new background for that, and they released it later as a free PDF. So I really hope that they do that with these two backgrounds. Another possibility is we may see them in Xanathar's Guide. So I hope they do one or better yet, both of those, so that we can all get access to those backgrounds without having to buy Tomb of Annihilation, which I mean, let's face it, if you're not planning to run that, isn't going to be super useful to you. Although it's got some good stuff in it, like those two backgrounds. Let's see. Does the guild's name have an abbreviation? Yeah, the acronym would have to be HGOAA. Yeah. They're just known as the guild with a capital G. So when you hear someone talk about the guild and they don't specify, guild of whatever, guild of merchants or whatever, if someone just refers to the guild generically, they're talking about the guild of adventurers. So that's kind of their abbreviation, or guild of adventurers is kind of the shortened term, or just the guild. Ali says, when they find a new city, they can build a portal there. Yes. So, and I actually, in a short thing I ran in the setting way back, we were starting a quest to do just that. And so there's a, what's called a keystone, which is a magical, object that is used to basically, let's see. So the way it works is, let's say they found another city and they wanted to build a portal there from Olondria. They build, they use this keystone. They build the portal in Olondria, and the keystone is able to duplicate itself. They then take the duplicate of the keystone to the city where they want to build the connection to, and they build a second portal there using that keystone. And it's those keystones that entangle the portals, like quantum entanglement kind of idea, and basically make them so that they're one portal. So you can build more portals, but you have to start at point A, build a portal there using a keystone, duplicate the keystone, and take the duplicate to point B and build a portal there. So that's something that adventurers do. If they find a city and a trade agreement is struck and agreements are made, then adventurers will oversee the building of portals from one city to the other, and they have to physically take one of these keystones from Olondria to the other city. Yeah, and Jose Luis says adventurers can build portals. That's an awesome idea for the West Marches campaign. Yeah, and this campaign, which I'm calling Hinterlands of Elandria, is very inspired by West Marches campaigns, which I've talked about extensively on the podcast and also on this YouTube channel and some of the live streams. So I'm using a lot of concepts from the West Marches style of campaign that Ben Robbins wrote about on his blog, at least for the beginning part of the campaign. So it's going to be a very exploration-focused campaign, and kind of the setup is they've heard this rumor of this village out there somewhere, and the player characters are brought together to form a new adventuring group that is to go investigate and find out if this village exists, and if so, find it. And then we'll see where it goes from there. But then the idea is that they're also going to explore this region, West Marches style, and the players will have the freedom to go wherever they want and do whatever they want. They will have some objectives from the guild to kind of give them some direction, but they'll also have a lot of autonomy to do their own thing, because that's very much how the guild works. Adventuring teams are very independent and allowed to kind of do what they want as long as they don't make trouble. Yeah. Allie, you're right. The portals are expensive and time consuming to build. Just like any magical thing, they require exotic components and materials, and they're very expensive to build. And these keystones are not unlimited in number either. So it's not an easy thing to do, and there's lots of room for adventure there. As I spit all over my thing, there's lots of room for adventure there, because somebody has to take the keystone to this other city, and all that good stuff. So yeah, that's everything in my notes. So those who are watching, if you have any questions or anything, go ahead and let me know. I'm gonna wet my whistle. I feel like that's the highlights. And again, it's not like you need to know all this to understand what's going on when we start playing next week. But the players have been given a lot of this information through the player's guide I made for them and our forum and stuff. So I thought it would be nice for those that are going to watch the campaign to have this information as well. And I think I've even gone into more detail here than I did in the player's guide, especially when it comes to like the matrilineal society of the culture and stuff. So this might be useful for the players too, if they want to learn more about how things work. And some of the various every city is going to be unique. So not every human culture is going to be like Olondria. They're not all matriarchal. They're not all matrilineal. And the same thing with, dwarves and elves and all that good stuff. They're all going to be different. So, it's not like the whole world is going to be like this. Speaking of that, I could talk a little bit, just really quickly. I'll go through the races, or species would be a better term to use for that. But we'll go through the species because it's a little different. So as far as what's available for the players to play, pretty much everything in the player's handbook. A few exceptions. There are no gnomes in Primordia. Gnomes existed long ago. They used to be a thing. But they're gone now. They were wiped out long ago, before the retreat, long ago. There are also no Dragonborn. There never were any Dragonborn. It just was never a thing in Primordia, or at least not that anyone knows. Again, there's a lot of history that's been lost, so who knows going way back if they ever existed, but not in recent memory. And there are no stout halflings. There are the other type of halfling, the Lightfoot halfling, but no stout halfling. So no gnomes, no Dragonborn, no stout halflings. Other than that, everything in the player's handbook is an option. And then there are additional races as well. There are wind elves, which are my reimagining of the Averial from second edition. So they are winged elves, and they're pretty interesting. They are much more closely tied to the Feywild than the other elves. Some people believe that they were the original elves, and the other elves have descended from. They live longer than other elves, and they're in that way they're kind of more like Tolkien's elves in that they don't really die of old age. They just eventually get sick of the prime material plane and return to the Feywild. But the Wind Elves have a problem with fertility. They have a really hard time reproducing, even more so than most elves. So they are pretty rare in the world. And in fact, at this point in Olondria, there is one Wind Elf in the city that actually my wife played in the previous adventure. And other than that, they don't really know if there's even more Wind Elves out there. They certainly don't know if any of the Wind Elf cities have survived, because they were remote and insular to begin with. So yeah, Wind Elves are kind of a mystery right now. There are Furbolg are an option for player characters. Goliath. So in Primordia, Goliath are humans that have giant blood in them. There are Aasimar, and in Primordia, I make the distinction that Aasimar are half angel. So I believe in the book, you could be an Aasimar and you had a celestial in your family line, like way back somewhere. In Primordia, an Aasimar is half angel. One of your parents was an angel. And that's kind of part of the magic of humans in Primordia is humans, other races will joke, especially dwarves, and elves will joke that humans will breed with anything. And some of the more disparaging among the other races will sometimes say things along the lines of a lot of the monsters that look like, like a mix of a human and an animal actually came about because some human actually bred with some animal, although that's not true. And I think most of the time they know it's not true. It's more of kind of a racial slur, I guess, against humans. So a distinction I've made in Primordia is your quote half races like Aasimar are always half human, because part of the magic of humans is that they can interbreed with other species in a way that elves and dwarves can't. So elves can't mate with angels, but humans can. So Aasimar are always half angel. I used the various subtypes from Volo's Guide, and I came up with more subtypes of my own. I basically have a subtype of Aasimar for all 8 or all 9 of the core, all 8 of the core domains, and eventually I'll have Aasimar for all 18 of my gods, because originally I just had one god per domain, and I mapped each domain to a god. And so that's why I have an Aasimar for each domain, because my concept of angels is that angels are servants of the gods that are created by the gods to serve them. Angels are not necessarily, quote, good. My gods don't have alignment per se. There are definitely gods, like, for instance, the god of murder, who's seen by humans to be pretty much an evil god. But even the god of murder can have angels, and does have angels. Just because he's a, quote, evil god, which he's really not, but just because he's seen as an evil god doesn't mean he has demons instead of angels. He has angels. Just angels are not all lawful good. So the god of murder might have chaotic evil angels that are very different from the lawful good angels. So I came up with subtypes of Aasimar for each of the gods, because I thought, well, if each god has their own type of angel, then it makes sense that there could be Aasimar descended from each of these different types of angels. I've since expanded my gods to 18, so I need to come up with like 10 more types of Aasimar. someday. Also, Genasi, air, fire, earth, water. Genasi are a player character race. So the Aasimar, the Genasi, and also the Tieflings are always half human, half something else. So Genasi are half human, half elemental, specifically like Ifrit or Jinn. Aasimar are half human, half angel. Tieflings are half human, half demon, or half human, half devil. And this is not how it is in the core rules. Like, for instance, a Genasi could be, by what's in the Elemental Evil Player's Companion, a Genasi could be part elemental, part elf, right? But in Primordia, it's not that way. They're always part human, because elves can't interbreed with elementals or demons or anything like that, but humans can, because that's part of what makes humans special, is that they're more compatible with more things. I was originally going to have Dragonborn in the setting, and I was working on mechanical changes because my Dragonborn were going to be actual half dragons, not Dragonborn. But I eventually I just don't like the Dragonborn, and they feel very undercooked to me, underdeveloped, and I just don't like them enough as a concept to take the time to fully flesh them out into a full-fledged race of the setting that makes sense. So I just did away with them. But there's always a possibility of adding them later. But if I do, they will be half dragons. They won't be whatever it is a Dragonborn is. So we've got Firbolg, Goliath, various types of Aasimar, Genasi, and then the Wind Elves, which are character options beyond what's in the player's handbook. So pretty diverse place, and we see that in the party that we have for the campaign. We do have one human. It did look like for a while there weren't going to be any humans, but we do have a lot of the half human races. So we have a Fire Genasi, who is half human, half Ifrit. We have a half elf, who's specifically half human, half night elf, or what we would call dark elf or drow elf. Oh, and they're a little bit different because in Primordia there are two types of night elves. There are dark elves like what we have in the player's handbook that live in the Underdark, but in Primordia, not all of the dark elves were driven into the Underdark. So there are still surface dark elf cities, or night elf, as I call them in my setting. So there's two different types of dark elves in Primordia, the surface dark elves and the Underdark dark elves. And mechanically, the only difference is that the surface dark elves don't have sunlight sensitivity, and they don't have superior dark vision. But otherwise, they're the same mechanically. But they're very different culturally. So we have a half elf who's half night elf. We have a Firbolg and an Aasimar, who is a protector Aasimar. And am I missing someone? A human. We do have one human. Oh, and a tiefling. So that's pretty cool. And that's actually a thing I intentionally did with Primordia, is I wanted to expand the half human, half something else options, because I think they're fun, and I think they're somewhat underexplored and underutilized in a lot of settings. And I feel like a lot of times humans are kind of they're kind of given the short end of the stick. Like, we have all these cool things about elves and dwarves and everything else, and humans are just, well, they're just like us, So I wanted to do more with humans, and so I thought an idea I had that I liked was this idea that humans are the ones who can form these kind of half breeds with all these other types of beings, and that it's something exclusive to them. It's something, just their biology, I guess, is just more compatible with more things than the other races, so that they can have, at the same time, we can have something kind of different about humans, and it does open up some fun possibilities as far as discrimination against humans by the other races, and how they're seen to be maybe immoral, or because they're getting with all these things that aren't their own kind. And also opens up, being able to have more of these races that are half human, half something else, which I think from a role-playing perspective are more approachable. It's a lot easier to imagine what a half elf would be like than it is to imagine what an elf would be like, because a half elf at least is partly human and not completely alien. So yeah. Let's see what's going on in chat. I think we're about ready to wrap this up, I think. Miro asks, do I do a session 0? I actually, as much as I preach on the podcast about how awesome I think session 0s are and how you should do them, I usually don't actually. And historically, I have not done them. Back in the day when I ran primarily in-person groups, we would just get together. I'd say, this is what I'm thinking about a campaign, and people would make their characters. And then if we had time, we'd just jump into the game. We didn't have something we called a session 0. I think a lot of the stuff we talk about doing in a session 0, I think we've always done. I know I did. We just didn't have a term for it, or didn't necessarily take up a whole session just to do that. In more recent years, since I've been running a lot online, a lot of the session 0 stuff is done through forums and email and stuff like that. And I've tried to do them, and every time I've tried to do a session 0, especially running online, I feel like it's kind of a waste of time. I feel like I got everybody together for a few hours to play. We should actually play the game. Session 0 we can handle on the forums when we're not all together. Like these golden times when we're all here together, we should be playing the game and not doing this other stuff. And so I did not do a session 0 for this campaign. We handled a lot of that kind of stuff through the forum that we have. And then I did an individual kind of 1 hour thing with each player, kind of a prelude to help them flesh out their character and figure out their backstory and stuff like that. So that kind of replaced the session 0. And Steve mentioned that, and yeah, I am going to post those videos. I'm working on editing them right now, so you'll get to see those preludes and the stuff we talked about, which will hopefully help you keep the player characters straight, which I know can be difficult with actual play, remembering who everybody is and all that good stuff. It'd be great if we could all wear costumes and it'd be easier, but hey, if the players want to wear costumes, I'm all for it, but probably not going to be possible for everybody to wear costumes. Okay. Let's see. We got some spam. We'll get rid of that. Let's see. Allie says, can they be like orcs and reproduce with whatever seems to be a good idea at the time? I don't think it's that open. And I didn't know that was an orc thing. Is that an orc thing? That's kind of crazy. No, they can't reproduce with just anything. But there probably are things humans can reproduce with that nobody knows about. So maybe I'll come up with more half-breeds in the future. Should I even say half-breed? That seems offensive. Of course, we're talking about make-believe, so I guess who can be offended? Make-believe people. We don't care if make-believe people are offended. But yeah, I probably need a better term than half-breed. That's very loaded, right? Steve says a drunk human can be made to do anything. Yeah, right? Allie says, would a half-dragon come from an egg? So, no. So a half-dragon would be half-human, half-dragon, and would be born. And And well, my assumption is that half dragons would have human mothers. So if the mother were a dragon, which probably would only be possible with a metallic dragon, because some of the metallic dragons, like gold and silver for sure, I know, eventually gain the ability to change their forms. And that's where half dragons come from, right? Like a silver dragon takes on a humanoid form and, begets a half dragon with a human. And I think by far the most common way that happens is the dragon is a male and the human is a female. But at least with a metallic dragon, it could maybe be possible to do it the other way around. But I would think that the dragon would have to stay in her humanoid form for the entire pregnancy, I would think. So yeah, in that case, I think they'd still be born like a normal human would be, because she'd be in her human form the whole time. Chromatic dragons, they don't have an innate ability to change their shape, but in Primordia, all the dragons of Primordia use the spellcasting variant, so all dragons can cast spells. And so chromatic dragons can gain the ability to cast like the polymorph spell, and so that's where the chromatic half dragons would come from. But I think in those cases it would pretty much always be the dragon would be the father, because you're not going to be able to stay polymorphed for 10 months or whatever. So yeah. Let's see. G-Ferg says basically humans are just trampy. That is definitely what some of the other races would say, or at least certain people in the other races would say. That's definitely their stigma they must live with. Steve wants a half bugbear. Steve loves bugbears. G-Ferg wants to know if a half halfling would be a quarterling. Yeah, right. Yeah, let's see. Wow, people are really taking off with the human fertility thing. Happy accidents. Would half-breeds be sterile like mules? No, they're not sterile. So like half-elves aren't sterile. But they can only breed with humans. Right? So or no. Never mind that. Well, let's say if they're breeding with something other than a human, chances of conception would decrease dramatically. But no, they're not sterile. Yeah. So yeah, but like they do tend, those lines would tend to get diluted, right? So if you're a half elf and you have a kid with a human, the kid's going to not be a half elf, right? They're going to be basically human. So yeah. All right. Well, this went on a lot longer than I thought it would, but I guess I shouldn't be surprised by that. So there's an introduction to the setting. We are going to start the campaign next Tuesday, 5 p.m. Pacific. I don't know if I'll get any of the preludes out before then, but I will release the preludes as I can, as I get them edited. And yeah, so we'll have the preludes, and we'll start doing the campaign next week. And then sometime in the near future, I'll be releasing commentary videos about the campaign. But like I said, I might have to wait a little bit on those, depending what I talk about and if it's going to spoil what's happening in the campaign, because I want to use the commentaries to help GMs out. And I didn't mention this before when I talked about this. Please use the comments for the YouTube videos to ask any questions or suggest any topics you'd like me to cover in the campaign commentary. So if you're watching one of the actual plays and you see something happen and you want to know more about why I did X or why I didn't do Y or what I was thinking or whatever, put a comment in that video, because when I do the commentaries, I'm going to go to those comments to look for what people want me to talk about. So I'll address as many of those as I can. So it'll be kind of a time-shifted Q&A where, because again, a lot of this is coming from me watching things like Critical Role and thinking about things I'd like to see. Like I would love to be able to ask Matt Mercer questions about things he did and have him do a video where he answers those questions. I think that would be very informative, and I'd be all over that. So hopefully other people feel the same way, and we can learn together. And believe me, I'm going to screw up. I screw up all the time. So, but I believe that you can learn as much, maybe more, from someone screwing up as from them doing it right. It's like I often think about music, because I know music. And when someone is a virtuoso on their chosen instrument, they can make the most complicated thing look as easy as breathing. And you see, like, you watch a phenomenal, I don't know, guitar player, and they make it look easy, right? You're like, oh my God, that looks so easy. I could do that. Because they're so good that it's easy for them, right? It's natural for them. So they make it look easy, even though it's not easy. So in that way, sometimes it's easier to learn from someone who isn't at that level, who's less advanced, because they do make mistakes, and you can see the things that they do that don't work for you, and you can learn from that. So back to GMing, I may do something that is just flat out wrong, like I should not have done that, or I may do something that isn't necessarily wrong, but just you don't like, and you're like, oh my God, I would never do that in my game. But I think that a lot of times that can be as enlightening as watching someone who's just, hitting it out of the park and doing everything right. So I don't want anyone to think that I'm doing this because I think I'm a true game master, that I've mastered it, and that people can learn from my brilliance. I'm very much of the opinion that I will make mistakes, and I'm hoping that you can learn from the things I do right as well as the things I do wrong, and the things you like and the things you don't like. So please use the comments of the videos to ask any questions or give your feedback or opinions on what's happening in the game, and then I can pull from that when I do the commentary. All right. G Ferg says, "Suffer for our entertainment." Hey, that's what we're here for, entertainment. I hope that this is instructive, but at the end of the day, the ultimate goal is always entertainment. So hopefully it's entertaining if it's not enlightening. All right. So yeah, I'm gonna wrap this up. Thank you everyone who tuned in and made comments. I really appreciate it, and I'm really amazed that so many of you made it, because there's no warning about this. This is going to be up, so if you came late, you should be able to watch what you missed. If there's any delay, it's because YouTube is processing. Once I stopped streaming, they process the video, so it may not be available for, I don't know, an hour or so while they process it. But once the processing's done, you should be able to rewatch this or catch what you missed. Or on the other hand, sometimes the video is available while it's processing, but it's really low def. So I'm shooting this at 7. Man, I'm spitting all over the place. I'm shooting this at 720p. So if you're watching this soon after I streamed it and it's really low resolution, it's probably because it's still processing. Just give it some time and refresh it, and it should eventually be at 720p, because that's what I'm doing. So yeah. So thanks everybody for tuning in. And again, let me know if you have any questions, and I hope to see you all next Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific for the first episode of the campaign. Thanks for coming.